Welcome in 365 Sports. Paul Catalina and Evan Abrams here with you. And Evan, last week was chaos, absolute chaos. It's ridiculous. Like, that's a week, I think we did talk about it where, like, okay, bet carefully because it looks bland. Like, you'll be like, oh, well, I'll take Alabama, the points, no problem. And then, you know, when the chaos bug hits, it's wildfire, right? It's like all over the place.
We had mentioned, I think there was like 20 home underdogs last week. So, yeah, I mean, I think we ended up with 3 top 10 teams losing to unranked teams. First time that had happened since like 2016, I believe. And we almost had a 4th and should have had one at like 3 a.m. Eastern time. But just a chaotic weekend, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. So this week is the juiciest week in college football maybe ever. It is ridiculous, the games that we have. We have, and we'll start at the top because when you've got 2 versus 3 teams that haven't played each other since a national championship game when they were in different leagues years ago in Dallas, a game I was there. Yeah, it was crazy. The one thing I remember, the 2 things I remember is Urban Meyer talking about his team like he was the manager of like a winning 4-H thing where it's like, no, we've got good stock here. And I was like, man, that's a really cold way to look at this after you won the game. Like, it was just so robotic. Mark Helfrich being devastated, and then a ton of Oregon fans, the blonde guys with dreadlocks. Like, that was sometimes you don't expect to see the cartoon version of something you think, and then you see it in real life, and you're like, oh, that's based in reality. Okay. All right. But anyway, Oregon and Ohio State this week. Oregon, home dog. Ohio State, probably the deepest team in the Texas and Ohio State are deeper than anybody in the country this year. And that line is getting thinner and thinner in college football, but still very deep teams. How do you see this one, and where are the places to make money in a game like this?
Yeah, with Texas and Georgia on deck, it's hard to not love this matchup plus that next week. So it's just absolutely fantastic walking into this. But let's focus here. So Oregon -1 was the look ahead. Now Ohio State -3.5. So if you want to have like an understanding of where we were maybe preseason or a week or 2 ago when we were looking at a team, especially Oregon's gone through a bit of a downturn in terms of trying, they should have blown out teams early in the year and that just wasn't happening. So I think that's probably adjusted to this line a little bit. Now, you look at the markets, tickets, money, all over the Buckeyes. I don't think many people are giving Oregon a shot in this one, just based off what we've seen in terms of the completeness of Ohio State. One thing I will say about the market, right now, according to Action Network, our data, 21% of tickets are on Oregon at home. 21% to cover this game. Now, 25% or less at home for Oregon hasn't happened since 2009. In any home game. It has been a long time since they've not only been the home underdog, which we'll talk about in a second, but the fact they're just being overlooked in the market. Now, this isn't Bryant Denny Stadium home underdog situation. This is a little bit different. It's been 33 consecutive games that Oregon has been the favorite at home in Austin. Now, since 2018 Washington, we kind of get the flip here. So, and if they close +4, which I don't necessarily think it's going to get there, it would go all the way back to 2016 Washington in terms of the number. Now, when you look at the game itself, since 2018, the Buckeyes haven't been fantastic against the number in these big top 10 matchups. 6-13-1 against the spread, covering just 2 of their last 9 games in the spot. That's 6-13-1 ATS mark, second worst in all of college football, if you think about that, behind just Michigan State, 3-13 against the number. So not fantastic. But to me, the biggest key is avoiding turnover-worthy plays from a Buckeyes defense. They'll send pressure, cover zeros to get Gabriel on the move and through zone reads. I think that's probably going to help them if they're going to do it. Now, the quarterback runs also could open up holes in certain circumstances. I expect Jordan James to absolutely go nuts here. Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel, I think they're going to be able to run a little bit. Here's the stat I like. Oregon has created an explosive run on 11 of 31 rushing attempts with James using power run. They are just running. I'm going to go with Oregon. I don't absolutely love it, but I'm going to take the points, and I'm going to assume that the home field and all of the above are going to get to them a little bit. So that's the number we're going with.
Whoa. Okay. Abrams Action Network. This is why we have this. This is why we educate here on this show. Red River, Texas, and OU. This is a huge number for this game. A huge number for this game. A game that historically is always weird. And, a couple years ago it was weird because there was a massive blowout. Last year was weird because nobody thought Oklahoma could really hang the same way, and then they win the game late. 3 years before that, it's the Caleb Williams Superman moment, all of those things. So we have all of this that's happened in this rivalry, and especially recently. But now we're getting a 2-score number in the game. That, to me, just as someone who's been to this game, who's covered this game a lot, who watches it, kick to end every single year, just would make me nervous as I was going to be like, yeah, give me Texas and the points.
I don't think you can take Oklahoma in this one, but I don't necessarily love laying the number either. So let me kind of walk through a few scenarios. So let's just talk about the line for a second. Look ahead was Texas minus 8.5 long time ago. Now 14.5. Now really, in terms of the markets, really tight all around. Everyone's seeing Texas, everyone's seeing Oklahoma, kind of bouncing back and forth. But you mentioned the number. Now historically, Oklahoma's been the better team like years ago. So Texas being a big favorite was really never something we had seen. So if you look since 1970, here are the biggest lines for Texas against Oklahoma. 96, they were minus 21. 1970, they were minus 17. 2005, they were minus 14. Those are the only 3 times they have been above 2 touchdown favorites. So we're going to fit probably in that 14-15 range in this one. So biggest favorite for Texas against Oklahoma probably since 1996 is what we're going to see here. Now,
right.
Overall, the rivalry hasn't been much of one lately anyway. Texas is 4-11 straight up in their last 15 meetings versus Sooners, being a favorite in just 2 of those games. So we're just really looking at a complete script flip here. Now, in terms of the game itself and how the handicap goes, Texas has entered the red zone 27 times this year, resulting in 1 field goal and 24 touchdowns. Michigan, when they faced them, ranked 12th best defense nationally, but the Longhorns averaged 4.5 points per possession that crossed the 40-yard line, which is honestly a ton. So if the way I'm going to look at this is, I'm going to look for Texas's team total. I think they're going to put up points and put up points easily in this one. Think about this. 12 different players have logged a touchdown for the Horns this year. 9 players recording at least 2 touchdowns. They're going to spread it around. I don't think they're going to have any issue scoring. I just don't want to really get involved with the spread because, as you said, weird things happen. So let me just start rooting for points. Now, I would love that 30 range. I see it kind of moving up a little bit across the market. So please just shop the line.
All right. That is very good advice. Cause I mean, when it popped at 14.5, I was like, oh man, like what, like, and again, like it's tough. Cause I'm just looking at the history of the game. Like you said, it's mostly been in Oklahoma's favor, especially recently.
And then you look at the markets though, right? Like I said before, I think it's interesting to say you have tight markets here in really a situation where Texas is the much better team. You would assume the public would come in and be like, give me the Longhorns, doesn't matter the number. But that's not what's happening. So it gives me a moment of pause.
Yeah. USC at Penn State is a very interesting one to me. This is not a ranked, but like, it's still like it's a huge game. It's even bigger for USC because they need to prove it against a Big Ten big boy. But this could already be their 3rd loss. And this is a very tough place to play, a very much improved offense under Andy Kotelnicki at Penn State. James Franklin has not really been great getting the, like those trophy name wins. And even though this is not, Caleb Williams USC from 3 years ago or classic USC, this is something that could boost him as he goes to play the Michigans and Ohio States and everybody else down the line. This one feels to me like it could be Penn State by a lot if USC doesn't score.
Yeah.
And given what they do well and don't do well, maybe it's going to be a good game, but I'm kind of leaning towards where Penn State has a seismic advantage in this one.
Yeah, let's just talk about the markets, and I'll get into the fact that I do kind of agree with you here. So look ahead was 4 for Penn State, down to 3.5. everybody and their grandmother seems to be betting the Nittany Lions in this one. There's just not enough interest in USC in the market. I think you've got like 85% of the tickets right now in Penn State for us. Just nobody interested in the Trojans. And usually I would say, okay, maybe they're missing something. Like maybe I should be interested in USC, kind of like the situation we talked about a little bit ago when you've got a team who's getting no love. And I'm like, well, maybe I do like them a little bit. I just don't see it. So this will be Penn State's first game actually in MST or PST in terms of time zones since 2009. Been a long time since they've made this trip and did this type of scenario for the team because they just never would have. It would have been in the Rose Bowl, which was the exact scenario they were in. But if you think about it, the road really hasn't been too tough for Penn State, which is a nice thing because I like them in this matchup, but they're 13-5 straight up, 14-4 against the spread. It's like 18 road games dating back to 2020. Franklin's done an incredible job taking this team. And honestly, the team in the past that he's taken on the road during that, I don't think it's as good as the one he has now. So it really does kind of give me a lack of pause in wanting to go with Penn State. But I've said this trend before. I think it's actually worth repeating since it's honestly continued. Bet Labs, which is our proprietary software that kind of gives me some of these trends that I'm looking at. In lined games, USC 19-35 against the spread in games played outside Pacific Standard. They haven't done a great job this year. They haven't done a great job historically. Last 20 years, no USC head coach above 500 in that spot against the spread. So very difficult in that circumstance. Now you look inside the game. Aller has a PFF pass grade of 87.2 with an adjusted completion percentage of 77.6, both top 5 in EPA. So they've done, like you said, an incredible job. I just see no reason why USC would probably stay in this one. I like Penn State at the short number. I just, from an offensive line point of view, from the run game, and then you look at USC on the other side, struggling up front, 92nd in defensive line yards. I just don't know how they're going to stop them. So I'm going to go with the Nittany Lions and kind of hold my breath most of the game.
All right. Ole Miss and LSU. This one last year was the most ridiculously bonkers game. Garrett, who's decked out in his purple and gold today, LSU fan, our producer, he's reliving some trauma, and I hate to do that because I remember last year I was in Orlando, and I was in my buddy's swimming pool watching the game, and I'm just watching my phone light up of Garrett It
was nuts, man. It was ridiculous.
My wife hey, who's texting me? She's like, Garrett? I'm like, why? And then she goes, bottom right corner. I was like, oh crap. Yeah. Yeah. So, but LSU. It looks like they're kind of finding their way a little bit since Caden Durham has stepped on the field. Their secondary is not classic LSU secondary. They've lost Harold Perkins for the year, but Blaine Baker has done an admirable job of piecing it together so far. Ole Miss has Trey Harris, who I don't think people are he's getting overshadowed by Genty and Travis Hunter and Cam Ward, but legit Heisman numbers he's putting up right now. Any other year, we'd probably be talking about Trey Harris a whole lot more.
Definitely.
Can LSU contain him enough to make this a game? And it is a rivalry game. It's a big deal to both of them. Can they show the vulnerable Ole Miss that we saw a couple weeks ago against Kentucky?
I feel like every time we're talking about any of these games now, we're just talking about a huge game and a home underdog. So yeah, it's just kind of crazy the way the market's working this week. But this is probably one of the more interesting lines. The fact that the look ahead was LSU minus 2.5. Now we got Ole Miss minus 3.5. So you have a complete change of how the view is of these teams all across the board. And then you look at the line and the markets all on Kiffin. Tickets, money, everything. People kind of interested in Ole Miss more than they are in LSU. I'm just not sure I agree. So Kiffin's never won in Baton Rouge. 0-2 straight up against the spread, losing by 15 points per game. Since 2019, he's done a good job when he's supposed to win on the road, though. 14-1 straight up, 11-3-1 on the number. But I'm not going to buy into it. I kind of like LSU in this spot. I'm going to go with the points, and here's a few reasons. So Kelly is a dog. 15-2 straight up, 12-5 against the spread, playing on extended rest, which is great. Now, you look at the situational spot. Tigers coming off a bye week to host a Rebels team playing their 7th to start 7 straight game to start the season. And then you kind of look at the opponents. It's Kentucky, it's South Carolina, it's Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern. It's just not this LSU team, and they already have a loss to talk about. So to me, the ups and downs having to go in a Baton Rouge, I'm just not a fan. I'm going to go with LSU here. Again, another game, and pretty much in most of these, where you're just going to have to hold your breath because I think you're going to get a decent amount of points. It's also the over I would tend to look at. I think under and Ole Miss just isn't going to be the result. So you'll at least split, in my opinion, but I do kind of like LSU in this one.
I think their under was 3 weeks ago against Kentucky. I think that's it. Like that was the one. That's the outlier.
Yeah.
Like their win or loss, it's going to probably be over for Ole Miss the rest of the way, right? So, all right, a couple of Big 12 games. The biggest one I think this week is K-State and Colorado. Colorado not yet ranked, but if they win this one, they sure as hell will be. They will be absolutely ranked. This is another one though, like, on the surface, seems like a bad matchup schematically for Colorado, as well as they played. But 2 weeks ago against UCF, they had a complete game. They slowed the run down. They ran the ball a little bit. I mean, we shouldn't give them a gold star for 120 yards rushing, but still it was 120 yards more than they've had in most of their games.
Correct.
So how do you look at Colorado and Kansas State, seeing it is at Folsom in Boulder, K-State has maybe more weapons or more kind of establishment than UCF has. They're more consistent. They had their blip on the radar against BYU a couple weeks ago. What are the numbers telling you here?
Yeah, the BYU game was just crazy. I think it kind of alters this a little bit more than we would expect because the look ahead was 6.5. Now it's Kansas State -3.5. It's basically a pick 'em game almost to that degree, as the fact that they're on the road. I think neutral site, you'd put Kansas State probably 5, 6, etc. So I think they're considered the better team. I think the way I would attack this one, you've had your Colorado up games, in my opinion. So I don't know if I'm like jumping at the gun to take the buffs here, but I do think the numbers moved down a little bit too much on the total. So look ahead was 58.5. Now at 56. I'm just going to look at the over in this one and assume on some level that both teams will find the end zone and that Shador and all those people and all that side will end up finding points on the board, maybe even through defense as well, through Hunter. But just a few numbers to get here. So Dion is actually 10-6-1 ATS with Colorado, won and covered 3 in a row now. First time in Boulder, they've covered 3 in a row for the first time since 2020. So been a minute for them. And then you kind of look at the whole picture for Dion. So 17 games, 7 of those as a favorite, 10 as an underdog. He's 6-1 straight up as a favorite, 2-8 straight up as underdogs, coming off the underdog win in that spot to give them his second win. In my opinion, though, the over again, the play in Boulder, over 6-2 with Dion, going over by 8.2 points per game. They just find points there that they don't play as well on the road. But ultimately, the thing that probably just takes me to the play, Kansas State struggled to defend the slot all year. Failed to create a pass break in 159 coverage snaps from Marquise Single. That, to me, between Parrish, Garber, the responsible for Hunter have been allowed 34 of 51 targets to be caught. I think Colorado is going to find points, but I also think Kansas State will as well. So,
oh yeah, so yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. All right, some rapid fire, real quick. You sent a couple. The one I'm kind of interested in. Iowa State remains undefeated. They against Baylor last week, they had a little rocky start, and then all of a sudden, okay, whatever was going wrong with this car is fixed now. The gunk's out of the engine, and they just hit the floor. West Virginia, tough place to play, Morgantown.
Yeah.
But they just are so remarkably efficient. This is probably not going to be trying to pick points in Iowa State games is probably a fool's errand most times. West Virginia's good. They're not great. What do you see here?
Yeah, for the millionth time, I feel like already another home dog, and also another home dog when it comes to West Virginia through Penn State and all these other. We've seen the role a few times now. But talking about just Iowa State, I love them entering this season. I was a big fan, and despite them even starting 5-0 for the first time since 1980, they just haven't necessarily lit the world on fire. They haven't looked fantastic, and even with a favorable schedule and the losses, including Baylor, Houston, their first 2 Big 12 games, it's just all over the board a little bit here. So. The thing with West Virginia to keep in mind, their 2 losses have come against a pair of undefeated teams in Pitt, blew a 10-point lead with 3 minutes to go, and Penn State in their opener. With that said, I'll just take my chances with the home running dog here. Field goal, raucous place. And I'll give you the one stat that kind of gave me some pause. Under Matt Campbell, Iowa State has played 2 previous conference road games. When ranked inside the top 15, they lost both against Baylor and West Virginia. I need the 3, but I'll go mountaineering here.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to get them soon. Right?
Somebody has to. It's just they haven't played that well. So
yeah.
It's hard for me to take the other side. Let's make a comparison here. When you talk about the Penn State game, way more comfortable laying points there than I am with this Iowa State team. To me, it's similar line, different scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Clemson, Wake Forest. Clemson last week did not score touchdowns, kicked a lot of field goals. They missed a couple of field goals. That should give everyone pause if you're a Clemson fan for when they play an actual good team down the line, not my beloved Knowles, but when they play an actual good team like Miami or someone, when it comes down to brass tacks. But Hank Bachmeier, experienced quarterback, Wake Forest, this is not the best version of themselves, but they're pulling off some wins too.
Yeah, I would be a little scared of the number itself. I kind of like the team total over for Clemson. I'm on Clemson futures from the preseason. I kind of assumed they were going to lose that first game. I bought in again, and they've been good ever since. But the 2 numbers I'll give you here, and believe this a little bit how you will, because the Clemson-Florida State game this year was not the game in the past. It used to be an emotional game. Both teams were really good. But it's worth noting, after facing Florida State, Dabo 15-0 straight up, 12-3 against the number, winning by 25 points per game. Dabo's been favored by an average of 17 points per game in the game after Florida State. So basically the same scenario here. And then you talk about this. Clemson's traveling from Tallahassee to Winston-Salem. Under Dabo, Clemson's undefeated, 5-0 straight up, 5-0 against the spread list as a double-digit favorite on a road trip. So they go on the road, they bring their guys, they're supposed to win, they're supposed to do their job, they end up doing it. And again, under that 10 mark, he's just 2-5. So I truly believe the line kind of tells the market here, but I'll just assume Clemson scores the points.
All right, Ashton Jeanty, my personal Heisman favorite right now. He's just doing crazy things. Boise's good team. What are the fun things going on around Ashton right now?
Yeah, so Boise hasn't lost to Hawaii since 2007, which kind of tells into how exaggerated the market might be for Ashton Jeanty right now. But let's just talk about him specifically. So 95 carries, over 1,000 yards, 10.9 per and 16 touchdowns. His 13-game projection is about 2,600 yards and 42 touchdowns. Now, I think everyone is comparing him to the Barry Sanders year in 1998. Barry, at that point, under him in terms of yards, under in terms of yards per carry, and under in terms of the touchdowns. Barry ended up with 37 and around that mark. So Jeanty is literally staying on pace, and that's really insane to say when I'm going to read this here because this is directly from one of our articles. The current Heisman winner leads the nation at 206.2 rushing yards, but you factor in the fact that he sat out the second half in 2 of his team's 5 games. So where he could be and where he is are a little bit different. The one thing I also kind of like Jeanty for, there's supposed to be like 15 to 20 mile an hour winds in this one. So if you think they're not going to run the ball, you're probably crazy. You look at some of those numbers. Anytime touchdown, minus 1,300. 2 touchdown, minus 280. Again, like we talked about last week, 3 touchdowns is your mark at plus 100. He is minus 120 to score in the first quarter. His rushing total, 183. If you just look at Maddox Madsen, the quarterback, his passing total is 210. So not too far off there. And here are the fun ones. So they've actually added a few markets in. He's 8-1 not to score. They actually have markets for 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, and 6 touchdowns, as well as 300, 350, and 400 rushing yards. So everything is up all over. He is the favorite for a reason. And I just don't see a reason why all these numbers won't hit against the Hawaii defense that decently porous, and especially with the win situation, guy's going to get a ton of carries. I just hope they kind of keep him in the game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, last week he got to 3 and then they took him out. So
correct.
Yeah. So people made even money on 3 and then he, then he got some Gatorade and a massage. So good for him. He's unbelievable. And finally, last thing, does Bama bounce back this week after being the center of that chaos? And Tennessee was part of the chaos, but because Vandy beat Bama, they get to kind of hide a little bit.
Everyone hid last week. I mean, if you lost and you were in Alabama, you weren't really talked about. But let's just talk, Alabama isn't coming off a loss, especially like that, very often. Since 2017, they are 7-0 straight up, 5-2 against the number after a straight up loss, all 7 games going under the total. But obviously, different scenario. Saban, DeBoer. Interesting that DeBoer is actually just 1-3 against the number 4 games after a straight up loss and losing as a favorite in 2 of those games. Not fantastic. The one thing I thought was kind of interesting, South Carolina has actually covered 3 games in a row versus Bama dating back to 2001. It's actually just 3-3 straight up versus Alabama. They are just one of 2 schools, 500 straight up or better versus the Tide since that year with a minimum of 3 meetings with Oklahoma. So obviously, history is history. Doesn't mean anything for this specific matchup, but kind of interesting the Gamecocks have kept it close. And one more I'll give you. Alabama's lost 2 straight at home at Bryant-Denny. ATS hasn't lost 3 straight since 2017, losing 4 in a row that year. So this would be a bit unprecedented for them not to even cover the number. So an interesting one all around. I don't necessarily really want to get involved, but it might be something I'd look at live because I kind of want to see a drive or 2 from the Tide to see how they're reacting, because you would assume it's going to be touchdown, and they're going to be back in rhythm, but I'm not so sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so where can they find you? Why don't I blank out? Middle age sucks, man. It sucks. Like you get to, this is your little like trailer for old age. But where can they find you on Action Network HQ?
Sure. So on Twitter, Evan H. Abrams, you can find me, tweet out all sorts of nuggets and information. I write 2 articles a week on Action Network, 1 NFL, 1 college, usually out early week, and I'm on tons of podcasts. Check out the Action Network podcast wherever you find pods, and I'll see you out there.
All right, Evan Abrams, Action Network HQ, with us pretty much every week, talking Vegas, numbers, gambling, sports gambling, all that stuff. So look him up, find him. Great numbers every single week. Evan, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon,
Appreciate
buddy.
it. Have a good one.
All right, Evan Abrams. We're back right after this. This is 365 Sports.